time when being a hero was cliche, right? We had all these anti-heroes come out. Alex Delarge, right? The Joker. Everyone liked these anti-heroes more than the actual heroes for such a long time, but I feel in the grand scheme of things that we have come full circle, or rather the circle is going to be completed. Because now all I'm looking for are heroes. If a hero's heroism can stand out now, they truly are something special. I think the most defining trait of a hero is that they make their own decisions. They make good decisions and they make bad decisions, but those decisions are their own. They live, see, the hero is somebody who lives with the consequences of their decisions. And because of this, they get to change their mind. Later, the hero can maybe change their mind if they want to. It's good to stand for something, but it's also okay to change your mind. But if you're just a stooge, you can't change your mind. If you're just a henchman, you'll always be waiting. You'll always be waiting to be sent into that room with Batman to go fight him. You can't like get an anti-Batman gun. You can't make the room. You can't do anything, right? You're just a henchman. You're just waiting for Batman to come in and beat you up. The sanctuary Adric Vanes had spoken of turned out to be secreted in a shadowed valley overlooking the plains before the mighty fortress, shadowed in dark clouds and explosions. The sounds of battle still raged from below, and Uriel could see a tremendous blaze deep in the besiegers' camp. Their flight from the Unfleshed had been a helter-skelter journey of false trails and looping attempts to prevent the beasts from following their tracks. Uriel could not shake the sound of the Unfleshed feasting on the prisoners, but was surprised at how little it bothered him now. Perhaps Vanes had been right. There was nothing anyone could have done for those poor unfortunates, and death was the best thing for them. The renegades had split up once clear of the death camp, and now returned to their base in ones and twos, climbing down the valley sides or hiking up from below. Our sanctuary, said Vanes, pointing towards a series of crumbling bunkers and blockhouses that had fallen into disrepair and clearly had seen better days. Partially filled in trenches and rusted coils of razor wire were angled before the dilapidated constructions, but Uriel's practiced eye could see that this place was not without its defenses. Barely visible gun nests overlooked the approaches, and he doubted that anyone could approach without some warning being given. What was this place used for? Vane shrugged. An old ammunition store. A barracks? A construction exercise? Who knows? All I know is that when we found this place, it was abandoned, and no one ever came near it. That's good enough for me. Uriel nodded as they crossed the trench via a series of iron sheets, and Vanes moved ahead of them towards the blockhouse beyond the bunkers. Pausanias leaned close to Uriel and whispered, "What are we doing? These space marines are renegades. Are we to damn ourselves even more in the sight of the Emperor?" "I know," said Uriel bitterly. "But what choice do we have? We can strike out on our own." "Aye, and maybe we will. But they have been here longer than us, and we may learn something of this world and its dangers." Pausanias looked unconvinced, but said nothing more as they reached the armored doors to the blockhouse. Whatever mechanism had once opened and closed them obviously no longer operated, and Vanes hauled them open with brute strength before disappearing and indicating that they should follow. Uriel ducked inside the blockhouse, The interior is surprisingly well lit. I realize that this may be a little more luxury than you're used to as ultramarines, but it's the nearest thing we have to a home just now, grinned Vanes as he walked ahead of them into the blockhouse's main chamber. Light streamed in through the firing slits, and Uriel could see that the chamber was full of the same space marines who had attacked the camp late earlier. Most were engaged in cleaning their weapons or repairing their armor, as Uriel was shocked at the sheer number of different chapter symbols he saw on display. Howling Griffins, White Consoles, Wolf Brothers, Crimson Fists, and many others he did not recognize. But most surprising of all were two figures crouched in the corner of the main chamber cleaning las rifles. Dressed in battered fatigues and torn uniform jackets of the Imperial Guard, they looked up as Uriel and Pausanias entered. Both men were so filthy and disheveled, it was impossible to tell what regiment they had belonged to. But both wore expressions of tired, proud courage. "Two new warriors for our band," called Vanes, before slumping against one wall and removing his helmet. Uriel refrained from qualifying that statement. As the leaner of the two guardsmen, rose to his feet and limped towards Uriel. His skin was pale and wasted looking, blotchy and unhealthy, his eyes bloodshot. The man extended a palazed hand and said, "Lieutenant Colonel Mikhail Leonid of the 383rd Jorian Dragons. Uriel Ventress. And this is my friend Pausanias." "What kind of space marines are you?" asked Leonid, stifling a cough. "I don't see any markings." "We are ultramarines, sent from our chapter to fulfill a death oath." Leonid shrugged. "A better reason than most for being here." "Perhaps," nodded Uriel. "And now, is that a colonel of the Imperial Guard? How does he come to be here?" "That is a long story, and you can read the story in Storm of Iron." Leonid and Sergeant Ellard, the softly spoken companion of the colonel, spent the next hour and a half regaling Uriel and Pausanias of how they had ended up in slavery on the bleak demon world of Medjugorje, beginning with the devastating assault of the Iron Warriors on the world of Hydra Cordatus, just prior to the spoilers' invasion through the Cadian Gate. He spoke of weeks of constant shelling of tanks and titans, and of the lethal cancers that base treachery had infected the men and women of his regiment with. But more than this, he spoke of noble courage. He spoke of a warrior named Ishara, a space marine of the Imperial Fists, and the sacrifice he and his men had made before the Valedictor Gate. Uriel felt a fierce sense of pride well within him at the thought of such a noble warrior standing before impossible odds, and wished he could have met such a brave hero. But ultimately, the story did not end well. The Iron Warriors finally took the Citadel before the Imperial reinforcements could arrive, and Leonid wept as he spoke of the brutal slaughter that took place upon its final fall. "It was a nightmare," said Leonid. "They showed no mercy." "The Iron Warriors serve the ruinous powers. They do not know the meaning of the word. Captain Ishara bought us some time, but it wasn't enough. The cavern below was too large, and there was too much gene seed to destroy. Wait. Gene seed? There was Space Marine gene seed Beneath your citadel? Yes. And Adeptus Mechanicus Majos told me that it was one of the few places in the galaxy where it could be stored. The wormsmith Han Sao stole it and brought it to this world, along with the slaves he took for his forges. Who is Han Sao? Asked Pausanias. He is the warlord who dwells in the fortress you saw as you came into this valley. It is this Han Sao's fortress that is besieged? Said Uriel, unable to mask his interest. It is, confirmed Vanes, wandering over to join the conversation and squatting down on his haunches. Why are you so interested in Han Sao? We have to get into that fortress. Vanes laughed. Then you truly are here on a death oath. Why do you need to get to Han Sao's fortress? Uriel paused, unsure as to how much he could trust Vanes, but realized he had no choice and said, Our chief librarian was granted a vision from the Emperor, a vision of Medrengard, and bloated demonic womb creatures called Demon Kablila, giving birth to corrupt, debased space marines. We are here to destroy them, and I think more than mere happenstance has brought us to this place. How so? Asked Vanes. Can it be coincidence that this Han Sao has returned here with quantities of gene seed for these Demon Kalibla, and that we should learn of them from a man who has seen them take it? Vanes looked Elyard and leaned it up and down. I wondered why I hadn't left you to die with the other slaves. Perhaps it was something other than curiosity. Uriel started. You know of the demon engine? Of course, said Vanes. There are few on Medrengard who do not. How do you know of it? It brought us here. You willingly traveled with the demon engine? Asked Vanes, aghast. Of course not, snapped Uriel. Its demon creatures overcame us. Ah, the Sacromata, nodded Vanes. Aye, then the Iron Giant within the demon engine brought us here. The Iron Giant? The Slaughterman? Slaughterman? Slaughterman, no. It said that it only wore the flesh of the Slaughterman. That it was the will of the demon engine it commanded. Then the demon is free, breathed Vanes. What is it anyway? Asked Uriel. No one knows for sure, began a sallow-skinned space marine of great age, wearing armor of deep red and bone, with a raven's head on his shoulder guard. But there are tales aplenty. Oh yes, tales aplenty. And would you care to share any of them? Asked Vanes impatiently. I was about to, growled the Space Marine, if you'd given me the chance. The Space Marine turned to Uriel and said, I am Seraphes of the Blood Ravens, and I served my chapter's librarian in the years before my disgrace. One of the greatest driving forces of my chapter is the seeking out of dark knowledge and forbidden lore. And over the millennia of our existence, we have discovered much, and all of it gathered aboard our chapter fortress. Your chapter knew of the Amphilos Demonium? Indeed we did. In fact, it was a source of particular interest to many of our secret masters. Over the 8 centuries, I read much of this demonic entity, and though much of what was said I believe to be false, there are some things I believe are true. It is said that once it was an ancient and powerful demon prince, a servant of the blood god that existed only for slaughter. The skulls it piled before its dark master were legion, but always one creature outdid it. One of the blood god's most favored avatars, a demon known as the Heart of Blood. So terrible, it was said to have the power to summon blood storms and drain the vital fluids from its victims without even laying a blade to their flesh. Okay, I'm getting sick of this fucking exposition. I'm getting sick of all this fucking talking. They go, they meet the fucking renegades, they connect the dots at the fucking, that's where they need to go, is Han Sao's fortress. I'm sick. I don't want to listen to any Blood Ravens babbling about their secret little intricacies. This book is really well written. I like it. When it's not well written, I stumble over my words more. Now, I'm gonna fast forward to the part where they just leave and go on the adventure. Because we've all been to a meeting before. This is kind of like, I guess the reason this is here is Graham McNeil. He wants you to know that this led to this. He wants you to know so bad that this happened, and I know it happened. You don't have to tell me. I read it, Graham. I'm aware. Okay, yeah, they're doing more sitting, more existential. There's like a power struggle in the camp, and finally Uriel gets all the renegade space marines. Basically, okay, he gets all the renegade space marines to go on a mission, and they agree to do it. But here's the asterisk. Baines does not want to go because he has his own little thing going on. He doesn't want to go. He's cool with just firing rocket launchers at the weird things he sees wandering out in the waste. But all of his men decide they would rather die than continue fucking living in that camp. So they all decide to leave. And then Baines is like, well, I guess I might as well go. And Uriel should have just fucking shot him. I don't know. It's a tough situation because there's so much psycho indoctrination and the Space Marines are so honor bound that if you take that away from them, it's almost cruel. It's like taking a giant squid out of the deeps of the ocean. There's nothing to sustain it, and so that's the question, right? Without your honor, what are you? What is left? What will you do? The warrior band gathered their weapons and equipment, filled with a new sense of purpose. As they prepared to leave their sanctuary, Uriel cleaned his armor as best as he could, and knelt to give thanks to his battle gear, placing his gun and sword before him and asking him to do the Emperor's bidding. Pausanias filled his flamer with the last of his promethium, and though it pained him, he knew he was going to have to leave it behind soon. A weapon with no ammunition was no weapon at all. At last the warriors were ready, and Uriel proudly led the ragtag band of space marines away from the crumbling bunkers towards the mouth of the shadowed valley. Adric Vanes marched alongside and said, "You realize you're probably going to get every one of us killed." "That is a distinct possibility," said Uriel. "Good. I just wanted to make sure you understood that." The sky darkened when they finally reached the edge of the valley, an unnatural darkness of low, threatening smoke clouds. Briefly, Uriel wondered if there was such a thing as weather on Medringard, but dismissed the notion. What had need? What had need? What man? What need had the Iron Warriors for weather? Nothing grew here or needed nourishment from the heavens. Ahead was their ultimate destination, and now that Uriel could see it clearly, he understood Vane's assertion that to attempt to penetrate the defenses of such a fastness was a suicide mission. The fortress of Hansau was a nightmarish black fang against the sky, ebony towers of dark, blood-stained stone, piercing the clouds of ash and crackling with dark lightning. The towers and arched halls of the fortress were surrounded by sacred bastions with walls hundreds of meters tall. The upper level stood involatile against the besieging army below, but the lower reaches were a cratered hell of flames and war. A haze of powerful energies surrounded the fortress as though it were not quite real. Uriel had to blink away, stinging moisture from his eyes. If he gazed too long at the lunatic architecture. The world itself echoed to the snarl of mighty machines, and the rhythmic drumming of hammers sounded like the beat of some monstrous mechanical heart. Like a malignant fungus, the armies of Hansau's attackers were spread out around the fortress in jagged lines of circumvallation, zigzagging approach saps, snaking through the lower foothills of the fortress, and ending in heavily fortified parallels, studded with enormous bunkers and redoubts. Blooms of explosions swathed the fortress, and the plains before it flickered and flashed with the constant muzzle flares of monstrous cannons and howitzers. A great ramp was under construction from kilometers back that would allow heavy tanks and titans access to the upper levels of the fortress. And Uriel could see that the plain was teeming with millions of warriors. Sprawling camps and entire cities had been built to barrack these soldiers. And now they were planning to successfully get through so many enemies to reach the fortress was beyond him. "Having second thoughts?" asked Vanes. "No," said Uriel. "Sure?" "I'm sure, Vanes. We can do this. It will not be easy, but we can do it." Vanes looked unconvinced, but pointed to where the plateau narrowed to become a near vertical shear in the rock that carved a path down the flank of the mountain. "That's the way that leads to the plains below. It's steep, very steep, and if you fall, you're dead." "How the hell are we meant to get down that?" breathed Leonid. "Very carefully. So don't fall." "That's all right for you," said Elyard, slinging his lasgun and making his way towards the path. "If you fall, you have a jump pack." "What? You want me to announce our presence here?" Uriel followed the renegade, and was seized by a dizzying lurch of vertigo as he saw the route they must take. The plain was thousands of meters wide below them, streaming waterfalls of molten metal. splashing along basalt channels toward lakes of glowing orange below. You need to go down facing the rock, explained Vanes, edging onto the path, barely half a meter across, and gripping onto rocks. Gingerly, he edged out into the path, leaning to the rockery and sliding sideways, along, and down. Uriel went next, gripping the rock face and easing himself into one narrow path. He kept his weight forward, knowing that to overbalance even a little would send him plummeting thousands of meters to his death. Cold wind whipped up at him, and he felt his heartbeats hammering in his chest. He edged out, following Vane's example, and utilizing the same handholds whenever he could. Within the space of a few hours, his muscles ached. His fingers burned with fatigue, and they were barely halfway down. His breath came in short, hard gasps, and it was all he could do not to look down. Hand over hand, followed hand over hand, and shuffling to the side, followed shuffling step to the side, until they reached the point where the slope became shallower, and it was possible to climb directly downward for a short distance. Oriel climbed down a narrow ledge. He flexed his fingers, the textured pads of his gauntlets torn and useless. His arms were leaden weights, and he hoped he had the strength to make it to the bottom. With a little more room to maneuver on the ledge, he finally eased around and gazed at the terrible scale of the siege works below. What had brought this siege about anyway? Was it some interscene conflict? Or was there some other, darker purpose to the slaughter going on below? Did the attackers have some knowledge of the Heart of Blood? Or the demon Kalaba? He supposed it didn't matter why the followers of the Dark Powers made war upon one another. The more they killed each other, the fewer there were left to attack the Emperor's realm. A startled cry from above snapped him from his reverie, and he looked up in time to see a hail of stones skitter down the slope, followed closely by Colonel Leonid, who screamed in terror as he tumbled downwards. Uriel pressed himself flat against the rock face and leaned dangerously to one side to snatch Leonid as he plummeted past. His fingers closed on Leonid's uniform jacket, and he gritted his teeth, gripping the rocks tightly as the colonel's weight threatened to pull them both to the ledge. Under normal circumstances, Uriel would have had no problem with catching Leonid like this, but off balance, on the edge of a crumbling corbel of rock, he felt himself being pulled from the cliff as his agonized fingers slipped from their transient handhold. "I can't hold on!" he yelled. The ledge crumbled at the edge, dirt and pebbles spiraling downwards to the plains far below. "Don't let go!" screamed Leonid. "Please!" Uriel fought to hold on, but knew he could not. Should he just let go? Surely the presence of Leonid would not affect their mission one way or another. He was a normal man amongst space marines. What good could we possibly do? Before he could release the grip, he felt a hand take hold of his shoulder and pull him back. Above him, Sergeant Ellard had to hold his armor and strain to pull him back. Uriel was too heavy for him to hold, but Elliot's strength was prodigious and held Uriel long enough for him to shift his grip to a better handhold with firmer balance. Centimeter by centimeter, Uriel eased himself back to the firmer ground of the ledge and was able to deposit Leonid back to the slope. The colonel was hyperventilating, his face pallid. "You are safe now," said Uriel, deliberately using the colonel's first name. Leonid took great gulps of air, keeping his eyes averted from the drop below. "Thank you." Uriel did not reply, but looked up to see a breathless Sergeant Ellard clinging to the rock face by what looked like his fingernails. Uriel respectfully nodded at the man, who nodded back. "Sir, are you able to go on?" "Aye," wheezed Leonid. "I'll be all right. Just give me a minute or two." The three of them waited as long as they dared before moving onwards. Uriel in the lead, with Ellard bringing up the rear. The colonel's steps were hesitant and unsure at first, but eventually his confidence returned and he made good time. The journey down the mountains blurred into a meaningful series of vignettes, traverses across terrifying narrow spurs of rock, and heart-pounding drops onto splintered ledges. Uriel continued down the slope of the mountain, pressing himself flat against the rock, until he felt a tap on his shoulder and looked around to see that he had reached the base of the sheer in the rock, and that he was on one side, on a wide, screed slope of ash and iron debris. A churned mass of broken earth sloped gently to the darkness and the plains below. The warrior band were spread out, breathless from their climb. And as Uriel looked up to see Leonid and Ellard completing their descent, his admiration for their endurance and courage soared, as did his shame at the thought of even considering letting Leonid fall to his doom. Adric Vanes followed him and said, "You made it, then." "You were right," said Uriel. "That was not easy." "No, but we're all here." Now what? That was a very good question. There were still many kilometers from the fortress, and Uriel could not even begin to guess how many enemy soldiers lay between them and its lower slopes. He scanned the ground around him, picking out scores of work parties and earth-moving machines, hauling hundreds of tons of earth to build the ramp that led towards the fortress. A hissing lake of molten metal pooled at the base of the slope, bathing everything in a hellish orange glow, and the rumble of engines and cursing voices drifted up from the construction sites. "You know, there's no way we can walk through that many soldiers, even if they are just human." "I know," replied Uriel, eyeing the huge bulk haulers, "but perhaps we do not need to." The heat radiating from the molten lake was stifling, filling the air with stinking fumes and making each breath hot and painful. Uriel edged around a tall mound of piled steel and waited for the rest of the work party to shuffle past, chained together at the neck by spiked collars and dressed in filthy rags. Servants of the Iron Warriors, in all-enclosing vacuum suits, shouted, gurgled commands to the slaves, beating and whipping them as they pleased. The rumble of heavy, tracked bulk haulers and booming gunfire covered the Space Marine's approach down the lower slopes of the mountain, the darkness of the smoky clouds only helping them to approach the construction site unobserved. The huge machines were bigger than the largest super heavy tank Uriel had ever seen. Controlled via a cab mounted on a high tracked engine unit that pulled a huge container on wheels with a diameter of 3 tall men. Laden with tons of earth and rock, they plied their stately way up the ramp before depositing their cargo on its forward slope, and then turning around and making their way back to refuel. Millions of tons had already been poured out, yet the ramp was barely halfway towards the upper levels of the fortress. Uriel watched as a trio of bulk haulers made their way towards the bottom of the ramp and turned to Pausanias. "They're coming," he whispered through his armor's box unit. "I see them," confirmed Vanes. Across the construction site from Uriel, he could see Vanes climbing the side of the ramp, gaining height from where he could use his jump pack to better effect. Other Space Marines were poised, ready for the word to attack. The first of the bulk haulers completed its wide turn and ground off into the smoke for more earth, and Uriel bit his lip in nervous anticipation. "Second one's almost around," said Pausanias, and Uriel could sense the anticipation in his sergeant's voice. "Aye. Ready? As I'll ever be." At these times, at times like this, I wish Idaeus were here, said Uriel. Pausanias chuckled and said, "This attack would be just his kind of thing." "What? Against impossible odds, and with no recourse to the Codex Astartes?" "Precisely," said Pausanias, nodding in the direction of the ramp. "Last one's down." Uriel returned his gaze to the hauler as it described a wide arc at the bottom of the ramp, and the massive machine turned towards the fortress. When the cab had leveled out, the huge trailer portion was still curving around. He rose to his feet and shouted, "Go, go!" over the box and ran into the open. Scattered groups of slaves looked at them as they ran for the enormous machine, but otherwise paid them no mind. Up close, the bulk hauler was even larger than it had first appeared. Fully 9 meters tall and constructed of dinted sheets of thick iron and bronze girders, its wheels were solid and tore deep furrows in the ground as it rumbled onwards. Fortunately, it was still moving slowly enough to catch Uriel and leapt. It was moving slowly enough to catch Uriel. And Uriel leapt for the iron ladder that led to the cab above. Space Marines jogged alongside the bulk hauler and clambered onto the running boards, beginning to climb the craggy sides of the trailer. Uriel swiftly ascended the ladder towards the platform bolted to the side of the driver's cabin, hearing a heavy thump of something landing on the cab's roof. Metal tore and he heard screams. He continued climbing, seeing the door above him burst open, and a creature in a vacuum suit and leather harness emerged from the interior of the cab. Harsh, static trills of fear emitted from a copper faceplate as it saw Uriel. But he didn't give it time to react, reaching up and grabbing its harness. It tried to draw a pistol, but Uriel pulled hard and sent it spinning from the driver's cab to the ground below. Kai Mache, the Crimson Fist Space Marine, riding the running boards, shot the mutant in the head, and the groups of slaves clustered around this part of the ramp cheered as it died. Uriel scrambled up the ladder and swung into the driver's cabin, ready to fight, but saw that there would be no need. Another 2 creatures, clad in the same vacuum suits as the one Uriel had thrown to the ground, lay dead in their bucket seats, torn open from neck to groin by Vane's lightning claws. The renegade sat awkwardly before a control panel, the bulk of his jump pack almost filling the cabin. He struggled with an array of levers and a giant wheel beneath a great rent in the steel roof and said, Do you know how to drive this thing? No, said Uriel. But how hard can it be? Well, we're about to find out. Uriel wiped a hand across the blood-smeared windscreen and peered through the rear ends of the two bull collars in front of them. Just keep it straight, and try to stay with the two ahead for as long as you can. Baines nodded, too intent on working out the controls to the bull collar to reply. Uriel left him to it and swung onto the platform on the side of the cab. The Space Marines of the Warrior Band were making their way along the running boards to the ladders at the sides of the rear of the bull collar, climbing up towards concealment with the empty trailer. Satisfied they could actually get close without significant risk of discovery, Uriel clambered back to the driver's cab and dragged out the dead bodies of the mutant drivers. He hurled them from the cab, those slaves chained nearest to where the bodies fell, tearing them apart with wanton abandon. It's not actually that difficult, said Baines, as Uriel closed the door behind them. No? No. A rhino's harder to control than this. It's just a little bit bigger. Just a little? Agreed Uriel. He left Baines to wrestle with the controls and stared through the dirty windscreen at the siege works beyond, the scale of battle taking his breath away. They passed great artillery pits, enormous guns, bigger by many times than the heaviest artillery pieces of the Imperial Guard, hurling tank-sized shells towards the fortress. Tall towers, hung with bodies and spiked bunkers, were spread throughout the camp, and a sprawling infrastructure had arisen to support the massive effort of taking Honsau's fortress. Dark wonders and monstrous sights greeted them at every turn, the myriad horrors of a demon world at war. The bull collars drove along horse-hung roads, skull-paved plazas where naked madmen capered around tall idols hung with entrails and pillars of iron that crackled with powerful energy. They watched mutants hurl crippled slaves into bubbling pools of molten metal, laughing as they did so, and Uriel turned away. He could not save them all, so he would save none of them. It scarred his soul to let such atrocities go unpunished. But he was coming to believe that Baines was right. Better to let them die than to be killed trying and failing to save them. As the bull collar swallowed up the distance between the outskirts of the camp and the siege lines, they drove over great bridges of iron that crossed deep trenches through kilometers of razor wire, and around deep pits containing screaming mechanical monsters. Shadows of great clawed limbs swayed in the firelight, and Uriel felt a shiver of dread at the thought of even laying eyes on such demon engines. The heat in the cab was oppressive, but he didn't dare open the door for fear of discovery, for they had been able to continue following the bull collars ahead of them. But as soon as the lead hauler turned away from the fortress, it would only be a matter of time before their ruse was discovered. The bull collars rolled onwards through the Iron Warriors' camp, driving through the great shanty towns of red-garbed soldiers and blazing drum fires. Soldiers chanted in praise to their masters and fired off shots as they danced around the flames. These are the warriors of Lord Berosus, said Baines, pointing to a gold and black standard raised high at the edge of the camp. And who is he? A rival of Honsau's? So it would seem. He is the leader of a grand company of the Iron Warriors, a vassal of Lord Tormino, one of the most powerful warlords. How do you know all this? Asked Uriel. We have sometimes taken prisoners, replied Vanes, and did not shirk from their interrogation. If Borosis is here, then so is Tormino. Whatever the reason they lay siege to Hansau's fortress, it must be a powerful one indeed. Perhaps, perhaps, perhaps they know that Hansau brought back from Hydra Cordatus a desire to share in his spoils of victory. Gene Seed? Yes, that would probably do it. We can't let that happen. Vanes laughed. We are but 30 warriors, and you would have us topple this world? Why not? Said Uriel. We are space marines of the Emperor. There is nothing we cannot do. I don't know why, since you are probably going to get me killed. But I like you, Uriel Ventress. You have an absurd sense for attempting the impossible. That appeals to me, said Vanes. Uriel returned his gaze to the siege works outside, pleased at the compliment. As the lead truck reached a wide crossroads and began making a wide turn towards a huge soil heap. Damn it! They're turning! Cursed Vanes, as he saw the same thing. We are too far away to make it on foot, said Uriel. There are whole regiments ahead of us. What do you think? Push it, said Uriel. Head straight for the fortress, and we kill anyone that gets in our way. We'll drive over them or shoot them. Just get us as close to that fortress as you can. I'll try, said Vanes, pushing the hauler into high gear and slamming his foot to the floor. We won't get far before we run into trouble, so get ready to give me some covering fire. Uriel nodded and left the driver's cab, calling to the other space marines and their band and alerting them to their plight. Acknowledgments flickered on his visor, and Uriel readied his sword and bolter as the bulk hauler rumbled towards the crossroads. The main route traveled by bulk haulers was clearly visible, curving off to the left, but instead of slowing to take the turn, their transport increased speed and roared straight ahead, bucking madly on surfaces not designed for such a heavy vehicle. Screams and shouts of alarm rose in their wake as tents, stores, and prefabricated huts were flattened. Oh, Maddie Hunt says Wagwan. But beneath their tracks, red liveried soldiers, slaves, and mutants scattered before them, those not quick enough to be crushed by their wild charge. Shots ricocheted from the sides of the bulk hauler, but they were sporadic, hastily aimed, and Uriel knew that they need not be concerned about how such small arms fire would affect them. It would be when word was passed on ahead that they would have to worry. Sure enough, he could see fire teams ahead of them, swinging around static weapon platforms that would tear their vehicle to shreds. Warriors! Engage! He shouted over the box. Space Marines, who had been waiting for his command, rose from behind the shelter of the trailer's sides and opened fire. Bolter shells raking the gunners of the weapons teams and ripping their guns to pieces. I already told you, Mr. Gordon.
Let's go.
I already told you. We'll go in a little bit, okay? We'll go. Fuck it. We'll go.